Okay, so I put out a query to some of my friends, some of my former students, from some of my former students' parents, and said, hey, I really miss teaching. I miss the interaction that I have with kids in the classroom. And one of the biggest aspects of that interaction were our philosophical discussions. So, how many of you guys would be interested in just like a series of either Zoom sessions or classes or videos about philosophy and its relationship to literature? And I got a pretty good response. So I'm trying to kind of figure out how best to structure this, because the way that I've done it in the past, obviously, is that philosophy really speaks to how I teach literature. I think that's one of the fundamental aspects of differentiation. If you have really, really smart kids, you can get really, really smart kids into even the most simple of texts if you incorporate philosophical questions. So this is my first video in what I'm going to call the philosophy series, and I'm going to throw it out to you guys just to kind of figure out what exactly you want to talk about, because there are so many different things. To give you some idea, I think one of the biggest aspects of philosophy is the existential crisis. And the existential crisis, when we talk about it in relationship to literature, is the moment that we understand that death is a real thing that's going to happen to us, and that we as people are going to not only not exist on this earth anymore, but our sort of impact on this earth is at most extremely minimal in a very small amount of time. So how do we grapple with that? And the relationship to literature then becomes the characters dealing with existential crisis, and that's more like on a surface level. So think like the Bildungsroman. I know I probably mispronounced that, but the Bildungsroman, like Catcher in the Rye and Lord of the Flies and stuff like that. When you're dealing with the knowledge that you're going to die as a character, how do the characters deal with that, and what does that say about the author's argument? But I think there's also a bigger argument in there of the character as a representation of immortality. So if the author is dealing with his own or her own existential crisis, the character then becomes an extension of that existential crisis, and that's where we get the Shakespearean idea of the play within the play, right? So when we talk about Hamlet and Macbeth and some of the really Titus Andronicus, some of the really great Shakespearean plays, is they grapple with the fact that at least I think Shakespeare knew that he was going to be one of those playwrights that lived forever. And so how do you deal with those characters acting as your extension of your existential crisis? It's also one of the reasons that I'm slightly obsessed with zombies. So then there's existential crisis, and like understanding existential crisis and existentialism as a philosophy. There's also the idea of sort of extreme skepticism, so like Descartes, and that's where you get into phenomenology. These are big words that I'll explain as we go through the series, but basically one of the really cool aspects of reading, and Jacques Derrida, my boyfriend, whom I'm obsessed with, talked about this. When we read, we actually remove ourselves from our present tense. When we are reading is really weird. Reading is you taking a book with some words on it and reading it and transforming your experience no longer in the present, but into this entirely this other realm, this imagination. So basically you stare at little black squiggles on a page and hallucinate, and it's fascinating. And people who get really deep into reading can describe, I smelled the things they smelled, and I imagined what they smelled. And sometimes we feel betrayed when we go and watch a movie, and the thing that we imagined in our head, in our like little wonderland, isn't the thing that's on the movie, because they have a different imagining of it, right? And so there's that aspect of philosophy, is the way that we understand the world around us, and the way that we understand reality and non-reality. So that's phenomenology, and we can talk about that. We can also talk about language. This was a huge thing that we got into in a lot of my classes when we were reading really in-depth books like Toni Morrison, and Emily Dickinson, obviously, and delving deep, deep, deep into that language aspect of it. Why is it that when I say the word cat, a specific picture pops up into your head that could be similar or different than the picture that I have, and yet we are still able to make meaning? You know, so like semiotics and linguistics and Proust and understanding all of those aspects of metaphor and how the ripple of metaphor ends up becoming almost an aspect of the way that we view the world around us, and then that sort of mirrors back into phenomenology. So here's my big question. I got two. So first big question, what would be best for you guys? It's very easy for me to get in front of a camera and just prattle on about, you know, a book or philosophy, and I can do it for a really long time, but I don't know that that's necessarily learning. I would argue that that's probably not learning. The way that I've done it in my classes before is that I'll have like sort of like something like this where you've got an image and then the student will point to different pictures on the image, and I can explain how it relates to whatever it is that we're studying. You know, if we're talking about a book, if we're talking about a literary time period. So question one, what should this look like? Should it be a series of videos? Should it be some Zoom sessions that maybe I record and then put online where I've got you guys interacting with me? Question two, which rabbit hole do you want to dive down first? Do you want to dive into, you know, the sort of base level is existentialism, and looking at existentialism as a literary philosophy and how that's kind of the basis of all literary philosophies when you're looking at a text is the existential crisis. So one, or two, would you want to get into something a little bit more in depth, the way that we understand the world around us, so phenomenology, and how when we're reading a book we change our reality into someone else's reality, and yet it is sometimes for some people even more real because it's more constructed. Or three, language in and of itself. And I don't want you to think that like if we start on one pathway we're never going to get to the other ones, but it's a lot. Like there's so much philosophy and literature that we kind of need a starting point. So that's what I'm going to throw out to you guys. If you could just put in the comments, what is it that you guys want to see? Do you want to see, you know, do you want to see Zoom sessions? Do you want to do just videos? Do you want to do like quick little bites like this where it's like, you know, tops 10 minutes of me yakking about philosophy and yakking about books? Or what do you want to do? And then the second aspect is, where do you want to go? Do you want to, what part of philosophy do you want to study? Is it existentialism, phenomenology, or linguistics? Like what avenue do you want to go in? What rabbit hole do you want to dive down? So I'm gonna go ahead and just throw this out there, and I will probably be just doing these over the summer, and I'll send out polls, and I'll probably do it through Kohanam Web, just because that's an easy platform for everyone to remember to get to, and I'll throw them up there and just, I don't know, see what you guys like, see what you want to do, see what you want to discuss. Maybe we'll do like a summer reading where we're all reading the same book and then discussing it. I would love to go back to the Poisonwood Bible. I mean, that was like one of my favorite things to teach of all time, but it doesn't have to be. We can do something like Romeo and Juliet. We can do Lord of the Flies, or not read at all. Like we can do movies, because there are tons and tons and tons of philosophical movies that we can study together and discuss. Yeah, so just let me know in the comments and tell me what you think.